I never believed in monsters until a few days ago. I've been camping dozens of times, hiked solo, even stayed overnight in backcountry spots where there's not a single person within miles. And I've never felt like this before. If you've ever been in the woods and felt like something was wrong, then maybe you'll understand the primal fear I experienced. This happened last weekend in northern Georgia, right on the edge of the Chattahoochee National Forest. A couple of friends and my buddy Cody, Jordan, and I planned a quick weekend camping trip. We live around Atlanta, so it's just a few hours drive to get up into the mountains. We weren't an official campground, just a primitive spot that Cody had camped at a few times before off an old Forest Service road. The area is quiet, basic, with a trail that leads deeper into the woods. We only saw one other car parked maybe half a mile down the road. Everything seemed normal when we got there. The weather was perfect. The stars were out, and we had the whole site to ourselves. We spent the evening eating over the fire, drinking a couple of beers, listening to music off a Bluetooth speaker, just relaxing. Around 11:30 or midnight, Jordan said she was wiped and headed to bed. Cody and I were still awake, and since neither of us were tired, we decided to take a walk down one of the nearby trails. That was our first mistake. The trail near our campsite used to be an old logging road, and it eventually leads to a wooden bridge over a shallow, rocky creek. Cody mentioned the bridge earlier in the night. Apparently, it's part of an old unofficial biking loop that connects to a couple other service roads. We grabbed headlamps and figured we'd just walk a mile or so out and back. As we headed down the trail, we were mostly just talking. The woods were quiet, and we always found it peaceful. There was nothing creepy about it at that point. You could hear owls in the distance, the occasional rustle in the underbrush, the kind of white noise that makes you forget about work and traffic and everything else. We crossed the bridge maybe 10 minutes in. It creaked a bit under our boots, but nothing unusual. The trail beyond it narrows a little and gets darker under thicker trees. That's when the silence started to change. You know how sometimes when something's about to happen, even if it's nothing dangerous, your body kind of knows, before your brain does, that arising tension in your gut. I got that feeling. Out of nowhere, like something was just slightly off. The forest sounds didn't stop all at once, but they thinned out, like someone was turning the volume down. That's when we heard it. One clear, sharp whistle. It cut through the quiet. It was deliberate. One sustained note, like someone signaling a dog or calling attention to something. It came from behind us, from the direction of the bridge. I turned around and instinctively flashed my headlamp down the trail. Nothing. Trees, brush, and more darkness. I looked at Cody, expecting him to make a joke, but he was dead silent. I could see he was tense. "That's not good," he said under his breath. "What do you mean?" I asked. He just shook his head. "That wasn't a person. At least not one you want to meet." At first, I thought maybe he was just trying to spook me. But then it happened again, this time to our right. Same exact whistle, same pitch, same length. Then another one behind us. Again, then to the left side. It was like it was moving fast. Cody stepped forward and whispered, "Don't talk. Don't answer it. And definitely don't whistle back." Something about his tone flipped a switch in me. I stopped scanning with my light and just started walking. Not running, but not wasting time either. Cody stayed close behind. We didn't say a word for a solid minute, but the sound kept following. Same whistle, 4 or 5 seconds between each and always from a different direction. We didn't hear any other sounds indicating a person or whatever else moving through the forest. I finally said, "Man, what the hell is going on?" He didn't answer right away, but then he said, "My granddad used to talk about something called the Whistlers. Says they live deep in the mountains, things that were the woods. Like clothing. You don't see them, but they see you and they mimic sounds." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Not people," he said. Not animals either. Just old things. He wouldn't say more than that. The second we stepped back onto the bridge, the sound stopped. No more whistling. No forest noise, no breeze, just dead, complete silence. It was like the air itself froze. We didn't stop walking until we saw the glow of the fire. Through the trees, Jordan was still asleep in her tent, snoring lightly. Everything at camp was normal. Our cooler was untouched, no branches snapped, no footprints around the edge of the site. We sat by the fire and stared into it without saying much. After a while, I asked Cody what he meant when he said not to talk. He said, "They notice sound. If you give them yours, they follow. Sometimes they get inside it. Sometimes they learn how to use your voice." I didn't have a response to that. I just let the fire crackle and tried to ignore my own fear. I would have laughed it off if I didn't have that psychological reaction that was going on. Call it survival. Instinct. The next morning, we checked the trail again. Nothing was out of place. No broken branches, no prints, nothing that would suggest anyone or anything had followed us. But when we crossed the bridge to the side, where the whistling had started, the forest felt wrong. I know that sounds vague, but that's the best description I have. It was colder by a few degrees. No bird, no bugs, just that thick, weighty silence. I grew up outside and I know what the woods are supposed to sound like in the morning. This was not it. Cody said we shouldn't linger. I didn't bother to ask questions. We packed up camp an hour later and left by noon. On the way back to the city, I kept turning the experience over in my head. Was it just some weird echo? An animal? Some other hiker playing a prank? None of it. Added up. The sound moved too quickly and always the same pitch, the same cadence, like it was on a loop or worse, like it was learning. Since then, I've gone down the rabbit hole of Appalachian folklore. Some people say the whistlers are spirits of the missing echoing through the trees. Others say they're creatures older than any tribe or settler, that they live underground and only come up at night. There are stories that say if you hear one and don't whistle back, you're safe. But if you do, you invite it in. I'm not saying I believe all of that, but I am saying I believe that something was out there with us, something we weren't meant to hear. If anyone has experienced something similar whistling in the woods, especially in Georgia or along the Blue Ridge region, I'd really appreciate hearing about it. I haven't gone back to that campsite. Honestly, I don't think I ever will. I'm sleeping with earplugs now. I don't want to know. If it followed us back, because sometimes at night, I swear I hear a whistle outside my window. I'm not sure why I'm writing this now, years later. Maybe it's because I stumbled across some old photos and audio recordings from a long-forgotten weekend. The kind of weekend that sticks with you, even if you wish it didn't. Back in the early 2010s, my friend and I had this small paranormal research group. Nothing professional, just a few kids from a tiny Appalachian town obsessed with local folklore, cryptids, ghost stories, and the unknown. We'd spent weekends camping in the mountains, investigating old houses, abandoned mines, and anything else creepy we could find. Most of our outings were uneventful. A few cold spots, some weird noises in the woods, the usual. But there was one place that shook us to the core. An abandoned homestead deep in the Appalachian wilderness known locally as Crowder's Hollow. Crowder's Hollow sits tucked away near the Nalichucky River Valley in Tennessee, just a few miles over the border from North Carolina. It used to be a thriving farm in the late 1800s, owned by the Crowder family. But tragedy struck. The story goes that the Crowders' only child, a young boy, died mysteriously in the 1890s. After that, the family slowly vanished, and the place was left to rot. Locals whispered that the boy's spirit still roams the hollow, sometimes crying or laughing on the wind. But that's not all. The darker part of the story involved a shadowy figure, a drifter who supposedly used the woods around Crowder's Hollow to hide his crimes. People say he has red eyes that glow in the dark and moves faster than anything human. When our local sheriff's deputy mentioned it during a fishing trip, saying, "Nobody who goes in after dark ever comes back the same. We knew we had to see it for ourselves." It was mid-July, late afternoon, when we piled into my old pickup truck, buzzing with excitement, convinced this would be our most epic investigation yet. The drive was long and winding down narrow mountain roads, surrounded by dense forests. By the time we parked at the trailhead, sweat was dripping down our backs and the air hung heavy with humidity. From there, the hike began. The path was barely a path, just twisted dirt trails overgrown with briars and wildflowers, thick trees pressing in on all sides. The deeper we went, the heavier the air felt, like a weight settling on our chests. Our flashlights cut thin beams through the thick foliage, but even with them, the woods felt unnervingly dark, thicker than night should be. When we finally broke through the last stand of trees, we entered a clearing where the Crowder house once stood. The place was in ruin, stone foundation cracked and crumbling, rusted farming tools scattered in the overgrowth. Trees had taken root through the floorboards and vines wrapped around the broken chimney. The first thing we noticed was how dark it was inside the hollow. The canopy above was so dense it blocked out stars, and moonlight swallowing every glimmer of natural light. Our flashlights looked weak and pathetic. Then came the temperature drop. It was nearly 90 degrees outside the hollow, humid and thick. But as soon as we stepped into the clearing, the air plummeted to near 60 degrees. I still remember the chill hitting my skin like an invisible wave, more than cold, though there was a deep, knowing feeling of wrongness, like the place itself was alive and hostile. We set up our equipment, cameras, an EVP recorder, a couple of thermometers, and a GPMF detector. We split up slightly, Daniel and I near the foundation, Jamie wandering toward the old well and what was left of the barn. Walking felt harder than it should have been. The forest was thick with branches and thorny vines. But even when we pushed those aside, it was like invisible hands were tugging at our clothes, pulling us back. My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep it together. It's just nerves, I told myself. That's when I noticed a moss on the low-hanging tree branch near the well. It was shaped almost like a twisted hangman. But when I zoomed in on my camera screen, I swear it looked like fingers curled around the branch, like it was hanging by its neck. Before I could point out, we all heard it. A sudden rustling, like something moving at lightning speed, through the underbrush. Then we saw it, a black shifting shadow darting between the trees. It didn't move like a person, more like it glided, but fast. Too fast. And those eyes, two glowing red dots burning through the darkness. We took off running, adrenaline surging, but the woods fought back. Branches whipped our faces, vines wrapped tight around ankles. I remember Cody tripping and swearing something grabbed his jacket. It was like the forest itself was trying to trap us inside. We burst out onto the trail, gasping, hearts hammering. But when we got to the cars, the nightmare wasn't over. One of the batteries, Cody's truck, was completely dead. Brand new, only a few months old. No explanation. We called a tow service, but the driver refused to come after. Dark. That hollow's cursed, he said. I ain't stepping foot in there until the sun's up. So we sat in my truck, silent except for the hum of the engine, waiting for morning. After we left, we reviewed our recordings. The photos were filled with orbs, glowing spheres darting and flickering like living things. One picture showed that moss figure on the branch, crystal clear and unmistakable. Our EVP recorder captured low whispers, angry voices in a language none of us recognized. One whisper distinctly said, "Go." The EMF detector had wild spikes, erratic surges that couldn't be explained by electronics. That night changed all of us. Cody moved away a year later. Jordan quit hiking and never touched equipment again. I still live here, but I haven't been back. Sometimes I swear I hear that. Child's laughter and the wind on summer nights. I don't know what exactly we saw in Crowder's Hollow, but I'm convinced it was something old, something angry, something that still haunts those woods. If you ever find yourself near the Natchitoches River Valley and hear the trees whisper or see glowing red eyes, maybe just keep driving, because some places in Appalachia don't want visitors. This happened when I was 10 years old. I'm 22 now, and I still think about it, especially on cool summer nights when I smell firewood. It was my second time going to sleepaway camp, a pretty normal one in New England with cabins, a lake, hiking trails, crafts, all that stuff. I was in cabin 4 with 6 other boys, around my age. We were all hyper and annoying, but we had fun. One night during our first week, we had a campfire night. The whole group sat around this big fire pit in the woods, not far from the cabins. It was just starting to get dark when we all gathered, maybe around 8 or 8:30 p.m. The counselors handed out marshmallows, and we all sang a few goofy songs. Then came scary story time, which was kind of tradition here. One of the counselors, I think his name was Josh, had a really good spooky voice. He stood up and started telling us a story about a ghost that supposedly haunted the lake near camp. He said a long time ago, a girl went missing during a late night swim. They never found her body, and now her ghost comes back every summer to pull kids into the water if they wander off at night. It was a classic camp story. Creepy, but everyone was laughing and pretending to be scared. I was trying to act cool, but I'll admit it made me a little nervous. I remember glancing over my shoulder more than once, right as Josh finished the story, and we were all sitting there quiet and spooked. It happened. A scream. A real one. Not a playful scream, not a prank. This wasn't part of the story. It came from the woods far but not too far. It was a single high-pitched scream, like someone was terrified. Then nothing. Everyone froze, even the counselors. No one moved, or spoke for what felt like a full minute. I remember someone dropping their marshmallow stick. One of the little girls from another cabin started crying. Then came a second scream. This one was shorter, like it was being cut off. That's when everything kind of snapped. Josh and 2 other counselors stood up quickly and told us it was probably just an animal, and that we should start heading back to cabins. We all walked back in total silence. When we got back to our cabin, our counselor, I think his name was Ben, told us we were going to have a quiet, lights out, and stay inside the cabin no matter what. I asked him, was that part of the story like a prank? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me and said, "No, but it's okay. You're safe." The weirdest part, nobody ever talked about it again. Not the counselors. Not the camp director. Not even the kids. A few of us whispered about it during rest hour the next day, but one of the older staff overheard and told us to stop spreading rumors. Later that week, we noticed that one of the junior counselors, a guy named Sean, who'd helped with canoeing, wasn't around anymore. We asked where he went, and one of the girls said she overheard the director say Sean went home early. No one ever explained the screaming. It wasn't an animal. I've heard coyotes and foxes since then. They can sound creepy, sure, but this was different. It sounded like human, like someone who needed help. I still wonder something happened that night. If the camp was covering it up, or if someone was hurt, and they just didn't want to scare us. I guess I'll never know. But every time I hear a scary story around a fire, I think about that night, and I remember how the fiction suddenly didn't feel so fictional anymore. I've done a lot of hunting over the years, mostly whitetail, sometimes elk, and I've spent more nights in the woods than I can count. I've had close encounters with bears, wild dogs, even mountain lions. I've camped solo, gotten lost for a full day once, and still never really felt scared. But what happened on a late November morning 3 years ago is the only time I've ever seriously considered whether or not something unnatural might be out there. This took place in eastern Oregon on public land near the Umatilla National Forest. I don't want to be more specific than that for reasons you'll understand by the end. It was deep into rifle, Season for whitetail and the weather had been unusually dry and cold. Perfect conditions for a ground sit. I'd scoped a large clearing a couple weeks earlier and knew there was buck sign all along the southern tree line. It was a good secluded area off the more commonly used trails. I didn't bother setting up a tree stand. I liked being mobile, and there was heavy cover at the edge of the field that gave me a clear shot without much exposure. That morning, I left the trailhead around 4:30 a.m. hiking in with just my rifle, pack, and headlamp. The forest was dead silent. Not unusual, but the kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat. I took it as a good sign, thinking maybe I'd catch something moving right at first light. I got to my spot around 5:05, still pitch black. I killed the headlamp and settled into the brush with my back against a tree. Thermals were perfect, no wind. Visibility was decent despite the darkness because there was a faint moon overhead, just enough to silhouette the field. I sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds before I heard it. A long howl coming from the far edge of the field, maybe 250 yards away. It didn't sound like a coyote. It was deeper, slower, almost mournful. It raised the hair on my arms instantly. I froze, straining to listen. Another 30 seconds and then a second howl. But this one came from directly across the field, in the opposite direction. Probably the same distance, same pitch, same cadence. Now I was alert, surrounded in a perfect triangle. I'm not ashamed to admit I started to feel unsettled. I've heard wolves before, only once in Wyoming, and this sounded eerily similar. Problem is, Eastern Oregon doesn't have a strong wolf population. There have been sightings, sure, in the occasional GPS-colored laner, but it's not exactly common. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe two separate groups of coyotes. Maybe my ears were playing tricks. Then came the third hell, and this one was the worst of all. It came from directly behind me, somewhere in the woods, maybe 50 yards. Back, close, too close. This one was shorter but louder. It echoed through the trees like it had weight. Something was letting me know it was right there. That's when I knew I had to move. I don't panic easily, but this felt wrong. Predators don't usually triangulate like that. They don't advertise their position. And even if it was just wolves, I've never heard them acting this way. I slowly flicked on my headlamp. Nothing, just black trees. I stood up, quietly disengaged the safety on my rifle, and pulled my sidearm from my hip. A .45 I always carry as a backup, knife in my other hand, just in case. I made the call to leave my setup behind and get back to the truck. It was parked about 400 to 500 yards west, down a narrow ATV path that cuts through the trees. Every step I took, I expected to hear movement or see ice reflecting back at me in the beam of my headlamp. But the forest was silent, dead silent. I didn't run. I walked fast, hard, pounding, never letting my headlamp drift too far from the tree and on either side. It wasn't until I was within view of the truck that I finally exhaled. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat in the cab for a good 20 minutes until the sun started to rise over the trees. I did go back once later that morning at around 9:30 a.m. when the field was fully lit. Everything looked normal. My gear was still where I left it. No tracks except mine. No blood, no drag. Marks. Nothing to suggest wolves had been nearby. But I didn't see a single deer that weekend. Not one. It's like the area had been cleared out. Not even birds were moving through. I've hunted dozens of times since then in that same region, but I've never gone back to that field. I avoid it completely now. I've told this story a few times over the years, and someone always suggests maybe it was just regular walls, or maybe I was imagining the spacing of the howls. But I've heard coyotes. I've seen wolves. From a distance, I know the difference, and I've never heard anything since that. Sounded like that third howl. I still don't know what was out there, but it didn't want me around. My husband and I have been on our wedding anniversary for over a week now. We have a camper in Cherokee, North Carolina that we've been staying in. We have an interest in abandoned things like towns and cemeteries. We decided that we would go visit Connor Cemetery near Couches Creek off of Newfound Gap Road, which is about 1.9 from the Economy Visitor Center. When we arrived, to a pull-off close to where the trailhead is supposed to be, we get out and start walking toward the opening in the woods where there is a trail. The trail itself is visible, but you would have to be looking for it. We're walking in, heading towards where the cemetery is supposed to be. I'm in the front looking, down checking for snakes and holes, and my husband is behind me. We pause for a second, and he said, "Babe, look at the statue." I start looking around and say, "Where?" And he points to the direction. What I was expecting was like an angel statue that you normally see in cemeteries. That is not what it was. I look further. Up the trail and off to the side is what looks to be a 12 to 15 feet deer/elk statue. The statue looks like it was either made of wood or wrapped in leather hide and looked preserved. The problem is that nowhere online had it mentioned this statue or anything of the sort. It starts giving me this uneasy feeling because it had a strange face and it was just a very weird place for something like that to be there. My husband then said that he did not like it at all and that we should get going. As soon as he said that, we turned around and left as fast as possible. Once we got back to our car, I told him that it did not feel right at all. He agreed with me and said that he saw a deer-like face with no snout, and he thinks that it had blinked and that its right ear had moved, but not like a normal animal ear, but with a full 360 rotation. I told him what I saw was like an elk body with a camel mixed with an elk-like face. On the way back to our camper, I started thinking that I should have taken a picture of it, but unfortunately, I didn't think of that at the time. Once we were back at the camper, we started researching things, and we could not find where this was listed, and we weren't sure if this was even seen before. We decided to go back to a local Native American bookstore that we'd gone to previously, and we spoke to the older lady who runs it. We had explained what had happened, and she advised us to speak to the visitor center in the national park to see if anyone had something similar or if they knew of any native stories of something similar. She had also said that sometimes the things choose for you to be the only ones to see it. We had thanked the lady and left back to our camper. Now, here I am typing this out and thinking about what we could have possibly seen out there in the middle of the woods. If you have any information on this, could you please let me know? We will be going to the visitor center tomorrow, and most likely we'll be going back into the woods to see if it's still there or not, the front of their trucks. I found myself more on guard this round. The noises of the forest had returned. Thankfully, I opened my window a few inches, just enough to let some fresh air and the nightly noises in. The darkness seemed oppressive after the first round being nearly daylight. This time, the world was confined to the two beams of light, fighting the overwhelming shadows of the menacing forest. I found myself going a little faster than last time. It wasn't really a conscious choice, just my subconscious asserting itself. Once again, when I got to the burned-out ruins of the wind turbine, the noises ceased. I went a little faster through that area. I thought I saw movement in the tree and headed toward me, but I refused to stop. I justified it by telling myself there was no working turbine here to vandalize. A little rattled, I finished my round quickly, nearly bumping my head on the ceiling of the truck a couple of times, from bouncing down the dirt road much faster than I should have. When I came out of the forest, I welcomed the bright lights and relative safety of the parking lot. This time, I parked at the end farthest away from the trees under a security light, just for good measure. As I read my book, my eyes kept darting toward the trees, as if I expected something to jump out at me. I continued to tell myself I was being foolish, but I also kept shooting glances at the trees. When my alarm went off for the next round, it took extra effort to make myself start the truck and aim the headlights toward the trees. The forest had gotten darker and more oppressive. it had also gotten quieter. There were still a few creatures making sounds, but not as many. I told myself most of them had gone to sleep. I only wished I believed it. Even the scent of pine had diminished. It had another scent to it now, the tinge of fear. My eyes darted from one side of the road to the other, taking in as much of my surroundings as possible, which wasn't much with the headlights barely able to cut a path through the suffocating darkness. I nearly jumped out of my skin when a deer walked in front of the truck. I slammed on the brakes, making a dust cloud hover in front of me. The deer glanced at me, then got spooked and ran off. I chuckled to myself at the little bit of revenge of the deer being scared of me, but my chuckle soon turned to chills. As the dust cleared, I saw something coming out of the trees. It was big, dark, and covered with fur. Sweat formed on my brow as my mind kicked into gear, and my foot mashed the gas pedal. A cloud of dust flew from my rear tires as the truck galloped away. I glanced in my rear view mirror, and to my horror, the creature was running behind me. Even worse, it was gaining. I stepped on the gas, making my speedometer jump and making me ride the seat like a bucking bronco. Thankfully, I had my seatbelt on, or I would have been knocked unconscious by the bigger bumps and ruts, sending my head toward the ceiling. I refused to look back for a long time. When I did, the creature was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief and slowed a little. I was never so happy to see the parking lot. I parked in the same spot at the far end, under a light, and thought back to my encounter, trying to make sense of it. The creature was huge. It was easily over 7 foot tall and walked on 2 legs. No, it ran on 2 legs. It was nearly going 35 an hour chasing me. That was the other thing. Why was it chasing me? What did I do to annoy it? Or was it just looking for a midnight snack? Time to get some answers. I got the piece of paper the other guard had given me and typed in the number. Then I sent him a text. I checked my watch and it was 2:30 in the morning. I didn't really expect an answer, but to my surprise, my phone dinged. I was expecting a message sooner. It said, "Why?" I replied, "Let's just say I don't think the boss told you everything he texted," such as I questioned. "You tell me why you messaged first." "Okay, have you ever been chased by anything during a round?" I asked. "Define anything," he replied. "Oh, I don't know. Like a deer, a bear, a big hairy creature over 7 feet tall, walking on its hind legs." I told him. "Are you going to quit if I tell you the truth?" He asked me. "That depends on what the truth is," I said. "No, you have to promise not to quit before I tell you." He texted. "Why?" "Because if you quit, I have to go back on the night shift," he told me. "And that's a bad thing," I replied. "Promise you won't quit." I was having flashbacks to my last 2 jobs, being tricked into a horrible situation, and then being told what was really going on. I can't promise. I've been burned in my last 2 jobs by strange rules. I told him. "Strange rules?" he asked. "You don't want to know." "Sounds like I do," he replied. "Then you tell me what's going on here, and I'll tell you what happened in my last 2 jobs. If you promise you won't quit," he reiterated, "I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you about my last 2 jobs, and then after that, you tell me if what's happening here is worse." "All right," he replied. I told him about my jobs as a park ranger in a fire tower and a warehouse guard, about the strange and supernatural things that happened and how they damaged me mentally and physically. When I was done, he didn't answer right away. That was some story. "Is it true?" he asked. "Those things happened to me," I responded. "Well, okay. What's happening here is you're being chased by Bigfoot," he explained. "All right. If you don't want to tell me, you don't have to lie." "I'm not lying. Think about the way you describe the creature to me. 7 foot tall, covered in hair, walking on hind legs," he continued. I thought about it for a long moment. "And why is it after me?" I asked. "He's not exactly. He's after whoever patrols the roads." "But why go to a site called Read it and read the story called I Used to Be the Night Watchman at a Wind Farm. What I saw there still haunts me. After you've read that, if you have more questions, text me. Okay, I replied. I went to the site and read the story. When I was done, I slowly lowered my phone, eyes wide. I texted. I'd read stories on Reddit before. I always thought they were made up. That's what I thought, too, he texted. But if this thing burned up, how is it chasing me? It's not, he said. I'm confused, I replied. I helped bury the thing. It's dead. What's chasing you is its mate, brother, cousin, who knows, but some creature with ties to that one, and it's not happy, he explained. And let me guess, it only comes out at night. I texted, yeah. He replied, I quit. You son of a __ you promise. He texted, so you'd rather have me die than quit. I asked him, you won't die if you stay in the truck. He told me, how do you know? I asked, because I've been the one doing the night shift. I thought about it for a long moment. Okay, I've got one round left to go. If I make it out without dying, we'll talk about my continued employment, and whatever we agree on, you have to back me with the boss. I told him. Deal, he texted. I started towards a forest. No time like the present if I'm going to die, right? As I pulled into the trees, it felt like I was passing to the gates at Jurassic Park. I hoped I would fare better than they did. The darkness was complete. Only the truck's headlights fought a losing battle, enabling me to see it all. When I came near the turbine, I used a flashlight to illuminate the base of the tower and see if anyone was there. Once I was past the turbine, I quickly shut off the light. I had no desire to see anything else. I rolled the window down just enough to hear the nightly noises. When I got to the second turbine, they were silent. I clutched the wheel with white knuckles, waiting to see what would happen. I was so busy looking around for something in the woods, I almost ran into the huge boulder sitting in the middle of the road. That wasn't here. Before was my first thought, followed quickly by its barricading the road, so I can't speed away. The second thought jarred me into action. I turned the wheel hard and swerved around a rock. Fortunately, it hadn't rained in a few days, and there wasn't any soft ground along the side of the road. I stepped on the gas as I rounded the boulder, just in time to see another boulder heading straight toward me. I swerved and floored it, fleeing the impact of the rock as it hit the ground beside the truck, missing it by a mere foot. I fishtailed, spewing dirt as the tires fought to gain traction. Once I straightened out, I got as much speed as I could, bumping around so much. I worried about the suspension and the tires. Anything that stopped this truck would be the death of me. I felt pretty good about outrunning the creature when I saw something terrible in front of me. I slammed on the brakes and slid to a stop, right in front of two boulders, sitting in the middle of the road. They were spaced far enough apart that I couldn't just swerve around. I had to pick a side with more room and go slowly around, nearly scraping the trees as I went. I just made it around when something crashed into the back of the truck, sending it flying forward. I looked back, and the tailgate was crumpled. There was a boulder lying on the ground beside the other two that hadn't been there a minute ago. I jumped on the gas pedal as a boulder landed right in front of me. I wretched the wheel to the right, feeling the metal scrape against the side of the truck, but I refused to take my foot off. The scraping got louder. I knew this was it. He would catch up to me, and I would die a horrible death. And then the scraping stopped, and the truck lurched forward. I was free. I built up a little speed, and then started swerving back and forth in the road in case he tried to throw another boulder. I counted to 20 before letting off the gas. Sweat dripped from my forehead. I wiped my sweaty hands on my pants. My hands were stiff from holding the wheel so tightly. I kept my speed up, not wanting to give him any chance to catch up to me as I bounced down the road. I turned a corner and slammed on the brakes. It was impossible. He was standing in the middle of the road in front of me. How could he have gotten here first? He stared at me and bared his teeth. For an instant, I thought about turning around, but I was almost to the end of my round, and going back meant guiding my truck back through a deadly obstacle course. With nothing left to do, I floored it and drove straight at him. If I was going to die, I was going to do my best to take him with me. He stood motionless as I gained speed. Just before I got there, he jumped. I watched as he landed behind the truck and turned on a dime to follow behind. I was gaining speed, but it wasn't enough and pulled against it. For a moment, I felt the truck slow. But then the tailgate broke free and left him holding the figurative bag. He ran behind, throwing the tailgate at me. I ducked just in time as it smashed through the rear window and kept going to the front windshield. I peeked back only to see him chasing again. I tried to gain more speed. It was more difficult. Covered in glass, each bounce in the road now making pieces of glass cut into me. It was also difficult, seeing with no windshield to protect my eyes and pieces of glass flying toward me from the remains of the windshield. I held up my hand to try to shield my eyes. As I did, I noticed I was slowing down. I pressed the gas pedal harder, but seemed to slow even more. I turned to find the creature holding the bed of the truck and digging its feet into the road to slow me down. I got my phone and recorded him holding the truck back for a few moments. At least whoever found the destroyed truck would know what happened to me. I resigned myself to my fate. I let off the gas and allowed the truck to stop. He released the back and started climbing into the bed. I was a moment from death. I looked down at my phone and pressed record, then grabbed a flashlight to switch it into strobe and shone in his face. He put his arms up to shield his eyes. I slammed the truck into drive and jumped on the gas. The creature rolled head over heels out of the bed as I sped away. I hit the parking lot doing 45 and nearly crashed into the boss as he drove up to the building. I skidded to a stop and put the truck in park. Right behind the boss was the other guard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the boss said, glaring at me. "Surviving," I said as I turned the engine off and tossing the keys through the missing windshield. For the first time, he noticed the condition of the ruined truck. "What happened to my truck?" he said. "Oh, I don't know," I said, sarcastically. "Maybe it was a giant creature chasing me that you neglected to mention." His eyes went wide and his jaw dropped open. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, regaining his composure. "I figured you wouldn't," I said as the other guard walked up to us. "Take a look at this." I opened my phone and played the video of the creature pulling the truck to a stop. They both watched in shock until the video ended. I put my phone in my pocket and looked at each of them. "Both of you want me to keep working here, correct?" I said. They nodded. "Here's my terms: a double in pay, taser, pepper spray, heavy firearms, upgraded trucks." "Is that it?" the boss said sarcastically. "No, I want you to hire a crypt hunter to come in today and capture or kill that thing. I have no idea how to get a hold of. Those are my terms," I said. "Give it to him or I'll quit too," the other guard said. The boss looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. "Fine, I'll get you what you want," he said, throwing his hands up in the air. I smiled and shook his hand. Then I walked to my car. "Oh, one more thing," I said. "You might want to have a bulldozer clear the road." The boss looked toward the trees as I drove away. I prayed he would do all I asked. I couldn't go back there knowing that this thing was waiting for me. I used to take the kids to a pool at a state park. The lifeguard told me a creepy story. It was a nice pool in Graham, concrete and very well maintained. It was just in the middle of nowhere. It was on state park ground surrounded by trees. The entire thing was very nicely done with a chain link fence all around it to discourage after-hour shenanigans. It's just the thing was in the middle of a forest. I have no idea what the planners were thinking, but it's free, and the kids love it. So I guess who cares if it's in the middle of a forest, right? That's what I used to think. I took the kids one day and forgot to bring a book to read. So I was bored. There's only so long you can stare at. Kids splashing around in the pool. I don't know how the lifeguards do it. I guess that's why they take turns every hour or so. With boredom my only companion, and absolutely nothing else to do but bake in the roasting sun, I decided to talk to the lifeguard who was on duty. I asked if she'd ever seen anything odd or unusual here at the pool. She took her eyes off the kids for just a moment to size me up. Are you sure you really want to hear? She said, turning her attention back to the swimmers. Sure, I said, because once you hear, you won't be back, she said. I hesitated for a moment, then chuckled to myself, sizing her up. She was a thin girl that looked like she might just be out of high school, or maybe a year or two into college. I imagined there was some story of a party gone wrong, or some kid that nearly drowned. In the back of my mind was a thought, what if she's playing me? I decided I was bored enough not to care, so I nodded. Yeah, I'm sure, I said. She leaned closer so that only I could hear the story she told, all the while watching the kids and never making eye contact with me. This was the story she told. I've been a lifeguard here for 3 years during the summer to help pay my college bills. Since a lot of lifeguards come and go, it was easy to get number one in seniority. I was the only one who was full-time and had some benefits like insurance. Everyone else was part-time and came and went quite often. Lately, we've been having trouble keeping people. We've had to cut some of the pool hours. I couldn't be here 7 days a week, although my boss seemed to think I could. At first, I thought our dwindling workforce was due to the current worker shortage going on across the country. Why work here when you can find something better? But as time went on, I began to find out why they were really quitting this easy job. I always got to the pool first and did a walk around to make sure nothing was broken. I picked up trash and generally made sure the pool is ready for guests. After that, I opened the lifeguard shack and tested the levels in the pool. One day, I arrived a little earlier than usual, and to my great surprise, I found wet footprints leading from the pool to the fence. The pool stays uncovered at night, and it's possible for someone to sneak in. However, in the 3 years I'd worked here, no one ever had. As odd as this seemed, what was even odder was the size of the prints. They were huge. I pulled out my phone and took some pictures before they dried out, and even took a shot of my foot next to the wet footprint. It was nearly twice the size of my foot. Now, I'm no basketball player. My foot is only a size 8 in women's, but still twice my foot size didn't seem normal to me. In fact, this whole thing didn't seem normal. Why break into a pool to go swimming when the pool would be open in less than an hour? I shrugged it off and went about my daily routine. I opened the pool and the people came in. No fuss, no muse. At the end of the day, I got another surprise. When I went to clean the filter, it was full of hair. Now, don't get me wrong. There are usually some odd things in the filter, and hair is not the oddest. I once found an eyeball floating in the filter. It was from that kid's stuffed animal, but still, it was pretty freaky to see it there. This hair seemed different. There's always hair in the filter, but it was longer and thicker. It was almost as if someone let a dog swim in the pool. Again, I shrugged it off and cleaned the filter, but I logged it in the back of my mind. The next day, the same thing happened. I made sure to get there a little early, and there were the wet footprints again. It was as if I'd scared someone off by arriving early, but how would they get their dog over the fence? It was 8 feet tall. Was someone sneaking their pet orangutan in to go swimming before ours? Was a bear somehow getting in and taking a dip? The hair I found didn't seem right for a bear. I searched all around the fence looking for any spots where something had dug under and gotten in. There was nothing. I double-checked all the gates. They were secure, and there were no spots where anything could get in. Again, when I cleaned the filter, there were more hairs. I kept some out of curiosity. On my next day off, I drove to the college I attended and asked the professor if he could analyze the hairs. A favor. He reluctantly agreed and told me it might be a few days. In the meantime, I was getting to work earlier every day. This mystery consumed me. I had to figure out what was going on, not only for the cleanliness of the swimmers, but for my own sanity. No matter when I arrived, whatever it was, seemed to know I was coming and got out just in time. I decided to change my strategy. I drove to work early, but parked my car at a trail head a mile away from the pool. It took me around 20 minutes to walk to the pool. I approached as quietly as possible. As I reached the rise where I could see the top of the fence, I could hear splashing. I keep on until I could see the level of the water. At first, I didn't see anything. Then suddenly, something exploded out of the water. It was massive and covered in long brown hair. It landed back in the water with a huge splash. I froze. I knew there was something, but until now, the reality hadn't hit home yet. There was a creature swimming in the same pool I watched every day. I stood there, transfixed on this apparition, as it frolicked in the water like a kid. It spouted water out of its mouth 20 feet in the air as it floated on its back. My mind kicked me out of frozen terror mode just enough for me to pull out my cell phone and take a picture. Unfortunately, I'd forgotten to turn the volume down when it made the lens click sound. The creature immediately snapped its attention to me. It glared at me for a long moment, causing my veins to turn to ice. I expected it to run away, startled, but it didn't. It slowly rose out of the water and stepped onto the concrete surrounding the pool. I know it stood at least as tall as the fence as it stepped toward me. I was too terrified to snap another picture as it hurdled the fence in one leap and landed 40 feet in front of me. I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The relative safety of my car was a mile away. It might as well have been 100 miles. I knew there was no way I could outrun this thing. It flexed its claws as it continued its slow advance toward me. Fangs spared. I knew I was about to die. It closed to 10 feet away. I could hear its breathing and smell the chlorine mixed with wet animal smell as the water dripped from its fur. And then it paused, T-cocked its head, then gave me a look and disappeared into the forest. A few seconds later, a car drove by. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and started the long trek back to my car. Every step I took, I wondered if it was following me. Every sound I heard caused me to whip around and look to see if the monster was sneaking up behind me. It seemed to take forever to reach my car, and after the last quarter mile, I ran. I didn't think. I knew it was following me. When I dove into my car, I locked the door and called my boss. I told him I needed to take the day off. He said he didn't have anyone to cover for me. If I took off, the pool would have to stay closed until my relief came in 4 hours. I fought a hard battle between my fears and my responsibilities. I reluctantly drove to the pool and opened it. Everything I normally did, all of my daily routine, took on an element of a horror movie. Every blind corner, I felt like I was about to be attacked. Every time I was out in the open, I could feel eyes on me. When people came, I felt a little better having company. But as I scanned the swimmers to make sure they were safe, I would constantly scan the trees for this monster to see if I was safe. I wondered if it would attack, even with the swimmers there. My mind wandered to the movie Jaws. All the swimmers in the ocean were blissfully ignorant that they were about to be a meal for a malevolent creature. I wondered if my swimmers were about to share the same fate. When my shift finally mercifully ended, I felt like I'd been put through the ringer. As I drove home, my attention was divided between the road and the image of that monster slowly approaching me. Claws out, snarling. I didn't even see the truck that blindsided me. I woke in a hospital with machines beeping and tubes running in and out of me. The doctor told me how lucky I was, that my injuries weren't that bad, and I should be out of the hospital in a few days. I called Professor and asked him what he'd found out about the hairs. He seemed hesitant and told me he would rather tell me in person. A few hours later, he visited me in my hospital room. He said that he couldn't match the hairs with any known animal, but when he contacted some lesser-known sources, they came up with an answer. I didn't really want to have my suspicions confirmed, but I needed to know for sure. He said it could be a Bigfoot. I pulled out my phone and showed him my pictured creature. He took it and studied it. He zoomed up and scanned through the image like a kid that had found $100. He asked if I could send him a copy of it. When I agreed, he was so excited I thought he would jump into my hospital bed and kiss me. Knowing what was hunting me didn't make it any better. In fact, now I knew no one would believe me. The professor even said I should be careful who I tell. After he left, I called my boss. He never asked me how I was, only when could I get back to work. When I told him I quit, he nearly blew a gasket. He screamed at me that it was my fault, he had to close the pool, and informed me that if I quit, the insurance wouldn't pay for my hospital stay. So I was trapped. I had to go back to the pool of terror and possibly face that thing. I had no desire to ever go back, but I had no choice. So back I went. 2 days after I was released from the hospital, I was due for my first shift of opening the pool. I made sure I didn't go early. I knew this thing existed, and I had no intention of trying to sneak up on it again. I was ready to live and let live. Unfortunately, it had other plans. I saw it more often, peeking out from behind trees, watching me as I watched the swimmers. When I closed the pool and walked back to my car is when I could especially feel its eyes on me. I practically ran to my car, slammed the door, and got out of there as fast as I could. I made sure my attention was focused on the road, even though my eyes kept darting to the sides of the road. The following day, I came to work a few minutes early and stopped at the ranger station on the way in. I told them what was happening, and they left me out of the building. The professor had told me to expect it, but it was still hard seeing people I'd talked to and had grown to trust turn. They're back on me like that. I saw the creature again that day in the trees, glaring at me, but I did my best to ignore it. When I got home, I was mentally and physically exhausted. My stress level was through the roof. I'd started taking pills to help me sleep, because this thing was in my dreams as well. That evening, as I tried to relax, I heard a commotion outside. I stepped out to find my trash cans knocked over. Not an uncommon occurrence, since I live on the outskirts of town. But this time when I went out to pick them up, it was there. It stood there much the same as the first day I discovered it, snarling and flexing its claws. I stood there, mind froze in fear, wondering at this dreadful apparition that stood before me. When it took its first step towards me, my fight or flight mode kicked in. I ran inside and locked the door. Then I called the police and told them someone was trying to break into my house. The monster helped corroborate my story by breaking a window while I was on the phone. I ran upstairs and hid in my bedroom closet. For a long time there was a dreadful silence. What was it doing? Was it toying with me? And then I heard it. I could hear its massive footsteps as a dull thud on my carpet. I heard it, slowly searching for me. It went all for the downstairs, and then I heard footsteps coming upstairs. I could hear them slowly, methodically working their way toward my bedroom. They came into my room. I could hear them walk around my bed and then over to the closet door. For a long moment, it did nothing. It just stood there. I could hear my breathing turn rapid. I could feel the sweat run down my cheeks. I could picture the end of my life in bloody, gory detail. The door swung open and I screamed. "Ma'am, it's all right." I heard. I opened my eyes to see the police officer standing in front of me. I blinked hard to make sure he was real, then threw myself into his arms. He held me for a moment, then pulled me away. "Are you all right?" he asked. I couldn't answer. My mouth wouldn't work. It took me a few minutes to be able to form a few words. Is it gone? I didn't see anyone, and I searched the whole house, he replied. I nodded automatically, not really, hearing what he was saying. He said the only thing they could do was patrol the area more often. He left shortly after, leaving me to my terrified self. There was no way I'd be sleeping anytime soon. I stayed up all night watching movies, mostly comedies, anything but horror. When the time rolled around for me to go to work, I wasn't up to it. I called the boss and told him I was sick, but he wasn't having it. He demanded I come to work anyway. I got an extra large coffee on the way to work that day, wondering how I was, going to stay alert enough to watch for swimmers. When I got there, the answer was already provided for me. As I started my daily routine, eyes darting to the trees, I saw there was something floating in the pool. It took every ounce of courage I had not to run to my car and never return. I slowly approached it and saw it was a deer, at least what was left of one. Its throat had been slashed in blood, over in the water around its body. What was even more disturbing was there was a drawing on the concrete. I approached and looked at the drawing. I immediately covered my mouth and backed away. It was a star with a circle around it, and it was drawn using the deer's blood. I snapped a picture with my phone and sent it to my boss. He replied, "Very funny." I told him it wasn't a joke. I took pictures of the deer in the water and sent him those as well. He accused me of doing it, so I wouldn't have to work that day, and I shrugged it off, nearly telling him who, or should I say what, was responsible. He told me to wait where I was and not to open the pool. I put the closed sign out and covered up the pentagram with a tarp. When people started showing up to swim, I apologized and told them we were closed for repairs. A few asked me what repairs, and I told them it was a filter problem and should be cleared up soon. When the boss arrived, he was beyond livid. He walked around looking at the deer and the blood in total disbelief. He screamed at me that the pool would have to be completely drained and cleaned. He threatened to make me pay for it. I told him I had nothing to do with it, and if he tried to blame me, I would call the police and press charges for harassment. That seemed to settle him down a bit. He told me to try to get the blood off the concrete while he started the process of draining the pool. Scrubbing did next to nothing. I found an old pressure washer that we used to clean the buildings and tried it. That seemed to work and pleased the boss that he wouldn't have to pay to have it sandblasted. All this time, I kept an eye on the woods looking for my hairy stalker. At times I caught a glimpse of him as I cleaned up the mess that I knew he had left. I wondered at the ramifications of him killing the deer and making the symbol. I wondered if he knew what he was doing. After a long day of cleaning and listening to the boss griping, I finally got into my car exhausted. As I drove home, I saw the monster on the side of the road. I was tempted to run it over, but I didn't think my car would survive it. As I was about to pass him, I saw him holding a deer by its neck and legs. To my horror, he threw the deer at my car. Time slowed as I had no time to react. Instead of hitting the brakes, my foot slipped off the brake pedal and hit the gas. It turned out to be a good accident. The deer hit the back of my car instead of the front. I truly believe he was aiming at my windshield. I didn't dare stop. I kept driving. Only once I got home did I check the damage. There was quite a dent in the rear of my car behind the passenger door, but it was still drivable. I believe if I'd hit the brakes, it would have totaled my car or gone right through the windshield and killed me. I shuddered at the thought of this monster actively trying to kill me. I wondered what I had done to deserve death in the eyes of this creature. I thought back to the first time I saw the footprints. I replayed everything that had happened. It struck me that he'd seen me take pictures of him, and that seemed to anger him. I thought of a radical idea. It was stupid and I didn't think it would work, but it was something to try rather than having this monster stalking me for the rest of my life. I drove out to the pool early the next morning. It was strange seeing it. Empty. I don't think I've ever seen the bottom of the pool so clean. I stood on the concrete beside the pool and held up my phone. The picture I had taken of the creature was on the screen. I saw it come out of the woods and bleep the fence, landing right in front of me. I tried not to show how very frightened I really was. He looked at me, then at the phone. I took it as a good sign that his fangs weren't bared. I set the phone on the ground and backed away. He reached down and picked it up, looking at the picture for a long moment, then turned and leaped over the fence, disappearing into the woods. And that was the end of her story. Well, that was some story. I said, "You should write fiction. That was great. You want to know the best part." She said, never taking her eyes off my kid swimming in the pool. "Sure," I responded. She leaned a little closer and whispered, "It's true." I smiled and rolled my eyes. "Sure it is," I said. "I'll tell you what," she said. "Why don't you look over my right shoulder into the tree line and tell me what you see?" I did as she asked, grinning at the joke this lifeguard was playing on me when suddenly my smile faltered. I saw something in the trees. It was a brown head peeking around a tree. At first, I thought it was a co-worker on the joke, but the head was over 8 foot tall. Its eyes bored into. Mine had narrowed. I found myself looking away despite myself. When I looked back, it was gone. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Huh? How?" "Long ago was the pool reopened." I asked. "Last week," she replied. I looked around, and over in the corner on the concrete, I could see the faintest outline of a star. My eyes grew wide. "Welcome to my world," she said without the slightest hint of humor. I whipped around toward the pool. "Come on, kids. We're leaving." I called out, "Oh, Dad, we haven't even been here an hour." "Why, do we have to go?" They responded. I looked at the lifeguard and then glanced up into the trees. "It's not safe," I replied. I loaded up the car with 3 disgruntled kids and started home. On the way, I kept glancing into the woods. I swear I saw the woods glance back. January 26, 2025. The story I'm sitting down to tell is a true one experienced by a faithful friend of mine, Sam, and I. I'm often reluctant to tell this story at length to most people, as the subject matter is unexplainable and rather strange. I don't want to be viewed as a superstitious nut, but having guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the United States, I feel I have the authority to tell this story. Essentially, what I'm saying is, I've been around in the deep, dark hollows, all across North America, and never experienced something so strange as I did that night. I don't fancify my expressions in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine there's something more to a twig breaking. As anyone who spent a good deal of time in the woods knows, there's no reason to. Eventually, you'll experience something daring or fantastic. I am a hunter first and foremost, and to a hunter, there's always an explanation, a reason to the wilderness and her inhabitants. It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make a successful hunt. As a hunter, you're a sort of woodsman detective, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. Let's just say this tale is a cold case. Let's get into it. It was early summer, and I was itching to go camping. I'd recently received a new tent and was eager to use it. I called up a good buddy, Sam, and we planned our camping adventure. We considered going up into the Grayson Highlands or even south into North Carolina. After debating it, we decided it would be more fun to camp somewhere we wouldn't run into any other people deep in the woods, far from anyone else, where we could bushcraft, hoot and holler, and bring a gun without fear of scaring the yuppies camping next to us. While we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the most remote stretch of woods between us. So we loaded up our stuff and began hiking deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flat land, a floodplain. area and creek. The small creek that ran gave the area a beautiful ambience. Early signs of summer were visible all around, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose into the west for miles. In front of us was a creek, and to the left, the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and north. To our right, the valley we were in continued to go down, cutting a deep valley, and on the other side of the creek, another ridge separated by a small stream from the ridge to the left rose into the west and to the south. These two ridges in front of us ran for miles, and the little valley formed by the small creek split these ridges for a long ways up until it hit the spring head. This is important for later in the story. Off to the right, further down the valley, more splits in the ridges are made by little tributaries. We started building camp by clearing the brush and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth. Remember this, the tarp extended out roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that he planned to sleep in. I've only ever camped in a hammock once, and it didn't go great, but I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. We gathered a hefty load of firewood, consisting of some nearby reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. I've only spoken about the joy of being out there on this block before, so I won't beat a dead horse, but it was really nice to be away from people. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the underscore until the sun went down. Now, one of the things Sam and I have always bonded on has been Bigfoot shows. We're both skeptics, and I would say we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject matter to be nostalgic, silly, and a fun thing to joke about. So I brought up the idea to Sam that we begin to hunt Bigfoot. He left and thought it was a great idea. So we began doing the antics they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We started with the classic tree. Knocks, Appalachian Sasquatch. A tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes through the forest. Supposedly, Sasquatch communicate this way. We didn't think anything of it at all. As I said before, we didn't really believe. We were just joking around. So we begin by knocking on the trees and then stopping and listening for a response. After a few times of doing this, we pause and hearing nothing. I began to think of a joke to crack and something else to do. Before I could open my mouth, we heard clear as day a tree, not far off somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks and we listened again. Then off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right, we began hearing knocks. Sam at this point was beginning to get freaked out a bit and was perplexed as to what it could be. I at the time was such a hard skeptic. I carried on and insisted that it was a person or a woodpecker. But who in the world would be out there deeper in the woods than we are on private land? What woodpecker makes 3 loud booming knocks on the tree that sound exactly like the knocks we make. Sam voices rebuttal. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot. I then insisted that we push the envelope by doing whoops and howls just like they do on TV. Sam was not very enthused by this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of us that night, knowing sometimes there's certain things you don't mess with. But at the time, I was full of piss and vinegar and stubborn as a mule about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I had also brought a gun with me and was certain I could fight off anything we would need to fight off. So we started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon and beyond the firelight. You couldn't see a damn thing. We would howl and wait, listening for a reply. After a few hells, the excitement of what was at start to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of the woodpecker began to appear true. Then, out of the dark distance came one of the strangest sounds I've ever heard. A howl. Not a canine howl, not an owl's hoot, but a pow. Sam's eyes were as big as backhoe tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason that one. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness and threw out another howl. After the left ridge, it replied to us again. The clearest ape whoop I've ever heard, as if it were recorded by researchers in the Congo. I looked at Sam myself, feeling more curious and excited than anything else. I reiterated, dude. Then something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More whoops and hells began on the ridge to the right and further down the valley. And they weren't random. They had etiquette, as if they were chatting back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl, the one to the right would whoop in hell. The first would respond, and then the one way down. The valley would chime in. Sam was really freaked out now and began considering if we should leave. I, being a stubborn idiot, claimed it was owls. Owls? We were both raised in these hollers. I've heard owls. You going to tell me that was an owl? Have you ever, in your life, heard an owl that sounded like A__? Sam argued against my claim. Well, no, but there's no way. Bigfoot is real. It has to be a bunch of owls speaking to each other. There's nothing else it could be, I replied, half laughing in astonishment and disbelief of what was unfolding that night. Sam and I kind of bickered for a minute over it and then decided the wisest decision was to stop antagonizing. Whatever it was in the woods, miles around us whooping and knocking. It wasn't too long after that we decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going, and every time the fire died down, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring all around the camp. We could hear what sounded like things being thrown and footsteps. From time to time, we would hear another knock or another howl coming from a new position. Sam would leap out his hammock and chuck loads of it onto the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then lay back down to sleep. This repeated about 3 more times. Each time the fire died, things got spookier and spookier. A few times Sam would say, "Did you hear that?" And every time I would just blame it on possums nearing camp, hoping to find food scraps. Well, about the 3rd time Sam ran out of firewood, meaning that this time when the fire died, it died for good, leaving us to the dark void of the Appalachian Holler. I vividly remember I'd fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp. I began to wake up. I was slowly waking up, thinking I was having some sort of nightmare when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was reality that was full of frightening sounds and things that go bump in the night. The woods around us had become loud with unexplainable movement, the movement of multiple large things. The whooping and knocking had stopped, which did not comfort me. With all the new sounds right outside my door, there was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around the camp that the sounds did not cross. Then, suddenly, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and branches. It was something large running full sprint through the woods, starting maybe 50 yards away and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves turned to crinkling tarp. The creature was standing on the tarp my tent was situated on. I was frozen like a child frozen in fear, eyes wide open. My heart was pounding out my chest so hard I thought it would explode. I then heard high above my tent, not near the ground, not 4 feet up, but high above my tent, the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a huff and blow, exactly the way you hear a gorilla do it on TV, or how the apes in Planet of the Apes do it. 3 forceful huff and blows. Then the creature turned around and ran back the way it came, back into the darkness of the night. Sam practically leaped out of his hammock and said, "You had to have heard that." I replied with, "Yeah, let's get the __ out of here." I slid around into the chamber of my 30-30 and crawled out of the tent We both got busy grabbing only our essentials and started out of the woods, using shitty dim flashlights. We made our way up the hill, frantically looking behind us into the terrible night and trying to move fast without running. We hiked a long ways, and by the time we made it back to the house, it was far past midnight. We never did see what it was that charged us, and we never did hear anything else after that. But whatever it was, scared us enough to make us hike out in the dead of night and leave all of our gear there. We returned the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish we had surveyed the area for tracks or some clues as to what it was. But at the time, we did not want to be down there for any longer than we had to. Having been some years since this incident happened, I would go down there in a heartbeat and not think a thing of it. When I come home, I usually feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off of your shoulders, knowing there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about. For my western outdoorsy folk familiar with cougar country, reading this and thinking, I don't feel a weight in the woods. My reply will be the question, have you noticed you've been stalked before? Cougars are some of the sneakiest creatures in the animal kingdom. And just because you've never noticed it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I myself have been stalked. I've written about it here previously. It's a feeling that sticks with you and definitely put you on edge in cougar country for a long time after. I have a colleague who guides western big game in New Mexico who told me a story once that during a hunt he had a fellow guide spotting for him, and that guide watched a cougar stalk my friend through a grove of trees before giving up. My friend never had the slightest idea he was being stopped. I believe for an avid outdoorsman in cougar country, it is inevitable. And as far as grizzly country, it's a similar feeling, but a bit different. Most of the bear encounters happen because you surprise the bear in thick woods. I have many friends from my time in Alaska who would share stories of being charged by monster grizzlies from out of nowhere. They're just hiking along, and then boom, 800 pounds of death is blasting straight towards them. And the consensus is the same amongst them. If you spend enough time out there, it will happen eventually. I luckily was never charged during my time in Alaska. I avoided known bear hangouts, but the few times I spent in bear country, I always had this jack-in-the-box anxiety, just waiting for it to happen. What is funny, though, is despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always returns. I know it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of woods specifically, because I feel it in most places in Appalachia. It's a feeling of being watched. A feeling that something is there, and a feeling of dread. And it amplifies every time you hear some strange crashing in the woods or a sound you cannot explain. Most of the time I've experienced this. I've had a gun, and I think to myself, come on, man, you're the most badass thing out here. Yet I can never shake that anxiety. My brother, without having ever heard this story, recently asked me over the phone one day, don't think I'm crazy, but have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house? I don't know what it is, but every time I go down there, I feel like I'm being watched, and I get filled with dread. Hearing him say that sent shivers down my back, simply because I always dismissed this feeling. I've swept this story under the rug for years, telling myself it was just a bear or whatever else. To hear my brother, who was a Marine, tell me that certified to me that I was not simply being a scaredy cat. I've only felt this in two regions of the country, Appalachia, and the redwood forests of Northern California. Now, some of you may be listening to this thinking I'm a nutjob Bigfoot believer. I've been reluctant to share this story for that reason, but I want to end this saying I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. We never did lay our eyes on anything, but I want to reiterate that the story is true, verbatim to how it happened as I can recall it, without any embellishment. I have no idea what it was, and you can make your own decision as to what you think it was, but being an experienced woodsman, never have I ever experienced something like that since, and I have no worldly explanation for it. Those were the events that transpired that night, and I'll let you make of that what you will.